This is a very interesting session and has generated the most questions in the last 2 days I have been doing these events. Okay, so let's see how it goes here. So in this session we're going to talk about the application lifecycle, how your phone application lives within the phone's ecosystem. So if you look at the Windows 8 application, Windows Phone 8 application, it has certain stages that it goes through, and we'll look at those, right? And in those stages, you have events that are fired, and you can take action on those events, right? So the stages basically are going from not running, right? So when your application is not running to the running state, and then from running to not running. So I start an application from the home screen. I launch an application, the application starts. I come to the main page, click the back button, the application closes, and I'm back. So it goes from not running to running, and then from running to not running. Okay? What could also happen is, I can go from not running to running, and then instead of pressing the back button, I press the home button, right? So what happens is my application moves off the screen, and when that happens, your application is taken and deactivated. It goes into a dormant state, right? It's like a person going into coma. That's the best example I can give. So what happens is there's no reciprocation from the outside world. No events are fired into your application in that state. No I/O is consumed. No network is consumed. Your application just sits in memory, waiting to be reactivated. Okay? It could happen that you have many of these applications. Yes?
Not actually closed.
No, it's not closed. It's hydrated into. It's like suspend. It's suspended, but there is no I/O happening. It's just blank. Okay. So it could happen that you have many of these applications being suspended, and at some point of time, you're going to run out of memory, right? You're going to run out of resources, and when that starts happening, the Windows operating system is going to take one of these applications and remove it from memory, and that's called tombstoned. Okay, so it could go from deactivating to dormant to tombstone. Okay, it could go from dormant to activating, and we'll talk about going from tombstone to activating also. Okay, so these are the various stages your application can go into. Yes?
What's the difference between tombstone and not running?
Okay. There's a big difference, and I will talk about it. Okay? So, these are the events that are being fired. And these are the stages in which your application is. So, you have not running, running, dormant, tombstone. These are the different stages. And then you have closing, launching, activating, deactivating. These are the events that are being fired. And where are these events being fired? Anybody? In the app.xml or app.cs file, right? In the application file. So I have the launching event, and this happens when the application goes from not running to running. This is the only time you are going to have this happen. Right? This is a place where you would do all your initial load of data. So you go refresh your database, bring content, and populate the UI. Now, one thing to note here is, even if you close the application, and I don't know if you all have noticed this or not, even if you close the application, Visual Studio is still running. Did anybody notice that? Yes. Visual Studio is still running, and this is different from Visual Studio 2010. In Visual Studio 2010, once you close the application, the debugger stopped. Right? In 2012, the debugger does not stop because it allows you to monitor the closing event and anything that is in there. Okay? Application deactivation and reactivation. So when you go into the dormant state, right, the deactivating event is fired. You are given 5 seconds to do your cleanup. After 5 seconds, your application becomes dormant and nothing happens. Okay? So you need to do whatever you want to do in the 5 seconds. Don't start opening web services, don't open connections to your database, they are not going to complete. It has to be something very fast that can complete within 5 seconds for you to store the data. So as you move from page to page, ensure that you have saved the data properly, right? If you have, let's say, multi-screen data entry operation, save intermediately so that you do not have to save everything at the end, right? So if you remember, we had the app object in, or the recipe object sitting in the app class. Think of an object like that, and then you have each page which has various fields. And as you go between those fields, you can take the data and put it into that class, right? And temporary class. And then when you're ready to save, you can save that whole object in one go. You don't need to save it to Azure, you can save it to your local store. Okay, because you are being deactivated, you have not completed the operation yet. Okay? And as I told you, your application may go from dormant to tombstone. And when that happens, no event is fired. Okay, let me show you, this will make it more clear for you. So the same thing applies for Windows 8 also. I usually use this to showcase to you people. So I am opening a couple of applications. I have Bing open. Let's open the music application. Let's open the news application. So I have a couple of applications that are open. Let's open the store. Okay. So I have a couple of applications that are open. Right? Let me go to the desktop. Start the task manager. If you see here, most of these applications are suspended except the store, which just got suspended. Right? If you look at each of these, look at the CPU utilization, it's straight 0. Look at the disk utilization, it's all 0. And look at the network utilization, it is all 0. So nothing is happening to that application. The application has been suspended, it's in dormant state. If I go back to the application, let's say we go back to the, it's not connected. So if you see here, the sports application is running. And after a while, it's going to go into the suspended state. There it goes. Right? So that application is now suspended. Now from suspended, it could go to tombstone. That means it's been cleared out of memory. Because too many applications were running, it could go to tombstone. This applies to Windows 8 as well. It applies to Windows 8 store applications. Yeah, not the desktop application. So there is no guarantee that your application will be resumed if it is dormant. So you need to ensure whatever you are doing, you are saving state. Now, the question you asked me was, and it's going to come in a few slides, but I'll answer it here. The question you asked me was, what is the difference between tombstoned and not running somewhere there? The difference is, when you're getting into dormant state, there's something called state dictionaries, right? So Windows Phone 8 is keeping track of where you are in your application. So let's say I move from page 1 to page 2, page to page 3. Windows Phone 8 knows that you have gone to page 3, right? So it will keep a count of where you are and the state you are. It's not going to hold memory for you. So when you go from Dormant to Tombstone, you lose the page's content. It is going to bring you back to page 3, right? Okay, let me demonstrate that to you. Okay, so let's start Visual Studio again, and I have an application here. I think it's this one. So it's a very simple application. I have 3 pages in here. Page 1, main page, page 2, and page 3. Okay? And if I run this, I'm on page 1, I click on the button, I go to page 2, I click on the button, I go to page 3, right? Now, if I put in content, this no, I can't. Okay, so this is a page test. Now I go to home. Let's go back. Okay, let's stop this. So this is and what I want to do is in the app.cs, I want to put breakpoints. Okay, so I have put breakpoints on launching, activated, deactivated, and closing. So let's start from the beginning. I start my application. Which is the event that is going to be fired? Launching. So the application launching event is firing, right? Continue. If I hit the back button, what is going to be called? Closing, right? Continue. Restart the application. Sorry. So again the launching is fired. Continue. And now I'm going to go to second page, third page, and then I'm going to say this is a test. And I'm going to hit the home button. It's deactivated. Why? It's going into dormant state. Right? Continue. Now if I hit the back button again, what's going to happen? It's going to be activated, right? So it's being activated. But it brings back the content as is. I had to do nothing in it. Okay? Now, in Visual Studio, if you were paying attention, we have this option says tombstone upon deactivation while debugging. What that means is, if I want to test the tombstone state, how can I? Because there's no guarantee when my application is going to be tombstone. I would be waiting for 2 days and it not gets tombstone. Okay? So I need a way to proactively know. So if I click this button, when I'm going to go to the dormant state, instead of going to dormant, it's going to take me to dormant and then tombstone. Okay? So now if I run this, continue, page 2, page 3, we say, this is a test. Click the home button, continue. Now if I hit the back button, what is the behavior? It is going to the first page. Who else? It's going to go to the third page. What else? With the text. Okay, third page, empty text. It will be activated. Okay, so let's see what happens. It gets activated. It goes to the third page with empty text. Why? Because it's coming from the tombstone state. All that was in memory has been lost. So it has no idea of what your data connections were, what context was there on the page, what information was there. It has lost all of that. The only thing it knows is you were there on the third page. And it's going to bring the third page back to you. It is, yes?
Any, to have the URL with all the parameters?
That's a good question. I haven't tried that. So do I get all the URL? So it's not, you're not navigating to the page. You're just reactivating. Okay? So you can store that in the state dictionaries. We'll talk about that. Okay, so there's a mechanism for you to store that. Yes? So the application has no knowledge of what happened. It's going to be fresh. Come again? So it behaves as if it has been launched for the first time. Okay? It behaves as if it has been launched for the first time because all the context that was there is gone. So initially when you were in Tombstone, you were in memory. Connections were open, right? So the moment you came out of memory, it was as if you had not gone anywhere. Right? But Tombstone means you're getting out of the memory. The memory is being discarded. So once the memory is discarded, it has no recollection of what was there in that. Yes? Yes, you will know if you are coming from a tombstone state. We'll cover that. Okay? So it knows which page you are on, and it brings back you to the current page.
So it stores the page state.
What do you mean?
This state know on which page I was last year.
Yes.
So it means it stores this information.
Yes, so it stores the information on which page you are, right? Not in which state you are. When I say state, means what was on the screen, what information was there, it does not have any recollection of that.
Can we increase the default tombstone time?
No. 5 seconds.
1 second?
Yes. Yes.
So let's say I'm going to Tombstone on page 3. So on which event should I write code to save the state?
On deactivating.
Deactivate. So in deactivate, how do I know on which page is the application came?
No, it's deactivation or the application. You know, because from the page object you will know which page you are on.
Suppose if you are on the page.
One second.
This state, the page, from the get to then will fire or not? We will get to for the page. So if it's fired, I can refresh the page again.
I think it will fire. So let's run it. Let's run it again. Okay, so we are being deactivated, and then I click the back button, and then the application is being activated, and then the on navigated to is being fired. So you are taken to the page on the on navigated to, and then you can check in which state you were in, and then you can rehydrate your application. Okay. Any other questions?
If you have a page which requires some login authentication.
So usually, okay, the login from the applications that I have seen, the login information is put onto the settings page so that you are logged in, right? If you need login information and it's not cached, then you'll have to redirect him to the login page to get the login information, right? And that's something you'll have to build in code. Let's run the application again. So you go to second page, you go to third page, you fill in your text, and now instead of hitting hit the start button, right? But now instead of hitting the back button, I'm going to launch the same application from the start menu. You see this? A new instance of the application is being launched. If I continue, I'm on page 1. The previous one is totally discarded. And that is the normal behavior for phone applications. So this sort of recaps whatever we have been discussing. You get 5 seconds to perform whatever tidying up you want to do. After that, you'll be forcibly removed from memory, right? The application is resumed from dormant whenever it's reactivated, right? And we saw that. So this is just walking through the application. I'll just skip through this because we have seen this behavior. If you remember, we went from the main page to the second page, right? And then we opened another application, and when we closed the application, we came back to the second page because it was dormant, and then from dormant it came back to activate. We have something called fast application switching. How many of you know what's fast application switching? Okay, a few. So fast application switching is basically holding the back button key, and it's going to give you a list of applications that are in memory, and you can choose any one of them to reactivate them. So you do not go through that. So like, for example, let's go back a few steps. If you see here, I had started the calculator, right? So I could have pressed the back button and held on to it, and it would have given me both these applications. And I could have chosen either this application or this application. So I don't have to press the back button to come back the stack to activate an application, right? I can just click on that application, it will be reactivated for me, right? But if I go to the home and I click a new or click on the home application icon, then a new instance is created and this instance is discarded, right? Now in the Windows Phone 8, you can have up to 8 applications in the back history stack. And we've seen this from dormant to tombstone, okay? So when dormant application is resumed, applications resume as if it was never gone, right? Just resume, so wherever it is left off. When a tombstoned application is resumed, it starts at the correct page, but application state has been lost. So you need to reload that. Okay. And this basically just walks through that whole process again. Okay, the application is tombstoned, and then when it is called back, it comes to the page, but it has lost its content. Okay. And how you know if it is dormant or tombstoned, what state you are coming from? So you have this API. It says, is application instance preserved? That means, do I have context of my application? That means I'm coming from a dormant state. If not, then you need to reload your data. And this is on the application activated state. As I showed you, you have this option in Visual Studio that you can click to tombstone your applications. And I showed you the different states also between tombstone and dormant. Yes?
You mentioned before that I can still collect the database information to some of these states. Which state?
I'll come to it. So, this talks about it. So, it says when the new instance of application is launched, the state dictionaries are empty, right? And as you progress, they maintain state. What you can do is, you can use the application service state for recording the information that you want in that state. So when you come back, right, you can query this and repopulate your screen. Okay? So for example, here. So once I am, if you see this on navigated from, so I can use the state information to log the text, right? So right now I am moving away from the page, right? So I can log this in this state, and then when I'm coming back to the page on navigated to, I can check if the dictionary is not empty. I will repopulate my screen with this. So you have two kinds of data. You have transient data, and you have data that you can store into your database. So think about it this way. You have a data entry screen. You are probably 3 pages into it, right? And for some reason you are being made dormant. Now, user would be very frustrated if he came back and you asked him to start from scratch and restart typing everything, right? So what you could do is you can store state, and when he comes back in between the application, because this is not something that you can take into the database and store it, it's incomplete data. So when he comes back into the application, you can take it from the state object and repopulate the screens. So the user has an experience as if he never left your application.
The state will not go away.
No.
Application go to Tombstone.
No. Unless and until your phone crashes, that's a different story. Come again? I think if your phone is restarted, then you would lose this. Yeah.
What if we are using any wipe calls and it gets deactivated?
So wipe calls don't get deactivated.
For example, I'm going to wipe call and I call another call from a regular landline.
So that's why I said VoIP calls don't get deactivated, and we'll cover that. Okay? Yes?
If my application is deactivated, okay, the user select another application. Could I make a process in background listen for GBS or somehow?
So can you make an application?
The user select another application.
Yes.
My application is deactivated, right?
Yes.
Okay. If I listen to GBS voice or somehow, if he deactivated, I couldn't listen to this socket or...
A few slides from now. A few slides from now we will talk about that. Okay? So let's talk about running under the lock screen. You may have scenarios where you want to continue your application running under the lock screen, right? So what happens now in the current situation is when you have the lock screen, your application gets suspended, right? So what if you want to run the application when it is under the lock screen? keep in mind, if you do this, you're consuming resources. And if the user does not realize that, then he could just flatten his battery. Right? So you should be a good citizen. You need to take care that you really need to run under the lock screen or not. Right? If not, then the end result would be the application would be uninstalled by the user and he would not use your application. So the way you do that is you set the application idle detection mode to disabled. Right? That continues. That allows the application to continue even if the lock screen is brought in. Right? So in this case, no activated or deactivated messages will be passed to your application because it's not going to be deactivated. It's going to continue in the background. Right? Also keep in mind that this is not a way that you can have two applications running at once. Your application is running off it, right? Also, you may want to have the capability to identify if your application is being obscured, right? Like, for example, you're writing a game, and for some reason, let's say a phone call comes or something. You're not going to wait for 5 seconds to take some action, right? You want to pause the game immediately so that, because the user will not be able to interact with your application immediately, right? Because it's being covered with some other application. So what you would want to do is probably pause the application or something of the sort. And this event allows you to do that. Then we have the simulation dashboard, as I told you, which allows you to check your application in lock screen and unlock screen. So you can use this to lock the emulator's screen or unlock it. Fine? And you can even check the network connectivity. Then we have something called the fast application resume. Going back to the scenario where I said if you go back to the home screen and you click on the application icon and relaunch the application, the default behavior is that your existing application is going to be discarded and new application is going to be started. What if you do not want that kind of behavior? You want to continue to run the same application again. You can use fast application resume to reactivate the same application, right? But you have to keep in mind that the user experience that you would provide to the user. Let's say he activated the application not from the main application but from the secondary tile. Okay, we'll talk about secondary tiles in a while. So secondary tiles are tiles that you can create from application. Let me show you so that everybody is clear because we haven't covered tiles yet. So for example, I have this weather application. And this allows me to have different places. So the default is Riyadh, then you have Jeddah and you have Khobar. So let's say I come to the Khobar application, I right click and then I say pin to start, right? What this does is it creates a secondary tile for me, right? And this has a deep link to my application. So when I click this, instead of going to my home page or to Riyadh, I'm going to be taken to the Khobar page, right? So if I click on this, I'm taken to Khobar directly. Now what would be the experience that I want here? If I click back, where should I go? If I click the back button on the phone, where am I expected to go? Out, right? This is the experience I would expect, right? What if I came from, in my actual application, from the main page, right, to Jeddah, and then from Jeddah to Riyadh, and my application got dormant. And then I launched my application from the secondary tile. What is in the back history? 3 pages. So when I say back in that application, it's not going to take me out of the application, it is going to take me back to Jeddah. And when I say back, it's going to take me to Riyadh. Right? So keep in mind the user experience that you want to give to the user when you are doing fast application resume. Okay? Yes?
These are all lifestyle, right?
These are all lifestyles.
So even this will consume the battery?
No, these don't consume battery. It depends upon how you're using them.
No, because even these will be extracting the latest data. Let's say, for example, if I add a Facebook tile, so it might be...
Let me come to the tiles and we'll talk about that. Okay? So what you need to do to enable fast application resume is you need to put this in your app manifest. So you have the WMAppManifest file, right, in the phone. In the task, you need to say background execution and location tracking. What this does is, it enables your application to run in the background as fast application. It is still going to be going to become dormant. It's not going to continue to run in the background, right? But when you click on the home screen or on the secondary tile, it's going to resume it instead of creating a new instance. Clear? Any questions? It will go to Tombstone. It will go to Dormant, it could go to Tombstone. But the difference between having this and not having this is, if you don't have this and you create a new instance, that old instance gets discarded. Remember I showed you earlier? Right? So if you click, yes?
Can you tell if you're coming back from one instance or from...
I am not sure. But I can check and I can tell you. Yes? So this is not going to use CPU cycle. Okay? So as I said, there are 2 flavors of fast application resume. One is the one we talked about, which does not consume CPU cycles. The other is geo coordinate watcher and geolocator classes. What this allows you to do, and this goes back to your question, you remember, is if you have a tracker which is tracking your geo coordinates and you enable it as for application, and it's going to continue to run in the background. Okay? So it's going to continue to monitor your application and it's going to continue consuming resources. Yeah. And that's how you can do the let's say, for example, as the scenario I spoke about in the morning, you are going on a trek and you want to capture the route, right? GPS. So this is how you can enable your application to do that. So this is the standard app relaunch behavior, right? And then this is true background location tracking behavior. I'll skip this for now. Let's move. And this is talking again of what I mentioned, is the experience that you want to give to the end user. So when should I use for and when I should not use for, right? If it really does not matter for that application to be resumed, right, then you should let it create a new instance of the application, right? If it is important for you to resume the application, then you need to ensure that you are providing the right kind of experience. And this continuation of what we discussed. Okay, so this is basically what you were asking. So if you are application is going to be it's running in the background, then instead of the deactivated event, right, you will have the navigated to event file, and you'll have the navigation mode is equal to new. So you know if you're coming back from far or not. Okay. And you can even have APIs that allow you to reset the navigation stack. So, for example, the scenario I said, if you want to go back to or you want to close the application instead of going back to the previous page, you can just clear the stack. Okay. So we have one more session that I would like to cover.